Well, welcome to Bible Mind. Well, we're going to continue the history of the Christian church, and this is part 2 of Martin Luther and the Reformation. And so just to catch us up just a little bit, and I hope those that weren't able to be here tonight will catch this online, because this is like the most pivotal moment of Christianity and the Christian church since its inception, since Christ started the church and the apostles. And so this is really what sets the stage for even where we are today. Let's review just a little bit of what we went over last week. Martin Luther's love and study of the Word of God led him on a path where the Holy Spirit really began to reveal to him the truth of God's Word about righteousness and our justification through the blood of Jesus Christ and our faith in Him. And so it really took him in a different direction because of what the church had become at that point. And so it put Martin at odds with the practice of selling indulgences, for example, because he believed that grace was something that God imparted, and we were justified through Him, not through the selling of indulgences, so that we can catch up even after we die and different things like that. So he wrote his 95 reasons why indulgences were wrong, and trying to prompt a debate. But then, as we talked about, somebody decided, hey, let's print these and distribute them, and they blanketed Europe and kind of caused a bit of a stir, and it thrust Luther into the limelight when he didn't really intend for that to be the case. And so Luther publicly declared that the Bible did not give the Pope the exclusive right to interpret Scripture, which is really an attack on the authority of the papacy. And so, of course, there's going to be pushback when that happens. After several attempts to set Martin straight, in 1520, Pope Leo issued a papal bull against Martin with threat of excommunication. On December 10th, 1520, Martin publicly burned the bull that was issued against him, and then in 1521, January, Luther was officially excommunicated from the church, from the Catholic Church, and so he was just pushed out. Wasn't what he intended when it all started, but I think in a way he embraced it, like, hey, if this is what it takes, let's do this. So in March of 1521, Luther was summoned before the Diet of Worms, right? Talked about not the Diet of Worms, which was a general assembly of secular authorities held in the city of Worms, presided over by Charles V. And so he had to come before the Holy Roman Emperor and state his case. And it wasn't really, they didn't really care what he had to say. It wasn't really a debate he was called to. It was a trial, which the only answer they wanted from Martin was, I denounce all of my writings, and I'll pull back on all that and forgive me and all that. And, of course, Luther refused to recant his statements, demanding that he be shown any scripture that would prove him wrong. So, and he even welcomed it. It says, show me the error of my ways, and I'll be the first to burn my books. They didn't really care. They just wanted him to blanket recant, and so he would not. So the council released the Edict of Worms, banning Luther's writings and declaring him a convicted heretic. It made it a crime for anyone to give Luther food or shelter. It permitted anyone to kill Luther without legal consequence. And so he had to, his neck was in the noose basically at this point. And so he was allowed to leave Worms because he had safe passage to come to the city. And so they had to allow him to leave, but it was with we're going to allow you to leave, but then we're going to come get you. And so he left. And as he was leaving, he was kidnapped, and he thought, this is the end, I'm done. But he was kidnapped by his friend, Duke Frederick. And so Duke Frederick brought him to a castle, and that's where we left it yesterday, Wartburg Castle, last week. This is Wartburg Castle. We've seen this before. Anybody remember where this was before in our discussion? Oh, it would be hard, but you get like 2 gold stars if you can think of it.
Is it remodeled?
Yeah, I'm sure it has been at some point remodeled. But does anybody remember Elizabeth of Hungary that we talked about? If you remember, she married Louis IV, Thuringia. And she was the one who had just a real passion for the poor, and Louis would go off to fight the Crusades, and while he was gone, she would have these long food lines, and she would just give away stuff or whatever. And then in the end, after Louis died, and she was kind of pushed out, I'm skipping a lot of the story because we covered this already, but anyway, she set up a hospital, and so this is some of the stuff we talked about. Elizabeth, this was the castle that she lived in. Okay, so I think I remember when we were talking about it, you're going to see this again, and so now we're seeing it again. So this is where Martin was brought to when he was kidnapped, and he found that when they brought him here and they set him up in a room, the room contained all of his writings, all of his books, everything was there. They had collected things, and they brought it for him, and they set him up really well. And so, I mean, he was pleased. All my stuff is here. And so while he was there, he grew his hair out, did away with the ring, that the monks have, and grew his hair, grew a beard, and he started going by the name Squire George, or some places you read it says Knight George. Just that was his code name, Squire George, and kind of he dressed to fit the bill, because I mean he had a price on his head. So if he was seen anywhere, or seen the Pope and the Catholic Church, they even Charles, they had spies out everywhere looking for him so that they could get him and bring him in. So he was in disguise. The emperor and the church was very interested in apprehending him, and so he was very careful to keep that at bay. He spent a lot of time writing during this time, and he would sign his writings things like Martin from Patmos, or Martin from the air, or something, just something cryptic, so it would say, and occasionally he would use a name that wasn't his own, but he would put out writings, people would know it was him, but not where he was. And so he was not just letters and stuff that went out, but he wrote a lot of books too, and he made friends with the printers. And so when you make friends with the printers, that helps you, right? Because they're going to print it and they're going to distribute it. The thing is, he didn't get money for all this, so he had his books out. It said that during this time that about a quarter of the books in Europe were written by Martin Luther. And so, I mean, he was like, one of the most prolific writers. Didn't get money for it, but it was out there. And of course, the books that were written from here, they didn't know where it was coming from. These books would just appear. Well, he embarked on another endeavor. He believed that God's word should be read by everyone. So obviously at this time, except for some rogue copies here and there that we've talked about, the Bible was in Latin and had to be read by a priest. And so most people didn't even know the content of the Word of God. And so he translated the New Testament into the German language to give the people the opportunity to read God's Word. The German language at that time was kind of all over the map. It was really considered a barbaric language, and so where it came from, from the barbarians that had come down and all that, this Germanic language, and so it was spoken by common people, but there were different dialects, just as there are of English, right? I remember when Terry and I were staying at the bed and breakfast that we were at in London, and I was having a conversation about languages with our host, Ethna Bentmore, and she was imitating, thank you, the different dialects from different places. It's like if you're from Sloane Square, or you're from this area, you're from this, Wessex, or, and so she'd say, this is how you talk there, or whatever, so she asked me, she said, well, do you think that I'm hard to understand? And I said, a little bit, yeah. And she said, well, I think you're hard to understand. I was like, how? I mean, I'm very plain spoken, how is this hard to understand, But there's different dialects. So this way German was, it had different idioms and different expressions and different languages. Well, Martin, he went out into public, and when he would go out into public, he would kind of dress in his squire motif, if you will, as Squire George, so he couldn't be recognized. And he'd go around, and he would pick up on the way the different dialects of German, and so he kind of averaged it all out. You know what I'm saying? If I'm going to make a translation to German, okay, he had to kind of make the way that it was going to be, kind of give it some unity. And this translation really had a big effect on what the German language is today. It really pulled the German language together and made it more like a dominant language instead of all these different, ways to talk it. And so that's one of the effects that the Bible translation had that he made. Luther's translation was printed and distributed widely, but again, he never saw a penny for his translation. After about 10 or 11 months of him being in hiding, he started hearing about how the movement that had been sparked had really gone off the rails. There were people that had started rebelling against the church, and they were smashing church windows and tearing down icons, and just really doing horrible things. And they were using Martin's name. They were saying, we're doing this, Martin Luther, and so this violence in the street was starting to erupt. And there were self-proclaimed prophets that were claiming that they had knowledge that superseded the Bible. And so Martin ended his exile in 1522. He got the fastest horse that he could find at Wartburg, and he rode all night, safer to travel at night, even though it's dangerous to travel at night, safer for him. But he rides all night to Wittenberg from Thuringia, and he finds out where the group was meeting and planning their next move, and he goes in there, and of course he looks different than he has before and everything. He walks in, and they're like, "Who are you, and what do you want?" He said, "My name is Martin Luther, and I want my pulpit." And so they gave him his pulpit and reestablished him as the leader of the movement. And he really had a calming effect on everything that was going on. There were still bad actors. There were still some outliers that were still doing some things. But the movement as a whole, when Martin got involved, had a calming effect because he was anti-violence. He's like, this is not what we're supposed to be about. We're supposed to be about love. And so at this time, the stability that he brought really set the church in motion, and his church began to grow. Since the end of the Crusades, there had been some reform, and we've talked about this just a little bit, to where these towns outside of the feudal system had began to grow, and so there was a lot of independence in those ways. But really, the majority of the people still fit inside this feudal system, to where, you're either a lord or, somebody of high rank, a duke or something like that, or you're a peasant that works the field and everything you do belongs to this person. And so this was kind of how everybody lived. Well, Martin had sparked a belief that they didn't have to live like that they could rise up and they could be more. So the most radical of the actors revolted in 1524, and we have the start of what's called the Peasants Revolt, and there's a few other names for it, but we'll just call it that tonight. They believed that Martin would really throw his support behind them because, he was kind of this revolutionary, and so they just knew that he was going to get behind them and be on their side, not so fast. Martin wrote a series of letters or sermons to weigh in on the matter, and he had really a lot to say about both sides. And so this is just, there's a lot that was written, so you don't want me to get into all that, but I thought you might enjoy just a couple of things. So to the princes and the nobility, he wrote, "To the princes and lords, we have no one on earth to thank for this mischievous rebellion except you princes and lords, and especially you blind bishops and mad priests and monks whose hearts are hardened even to this present day, and who do not cease to rave and rage against the holy gospel, although you know that it speaks the truth." And he goes on to really spell out how this rebellion is their fault, and if they really want it to end, then they're going to have to change their ways. They're going to have to do something different because they're not going to squash it any other way. It's not going to go away otherwise. And he made it clear that the rebellion was not caused by him. I didn't set this in motion. This is not my doing. He actually blamed it on what he called the murder prophets, and we're not really going to study much on them. But there were some key characters that were stirring up this rebellion and calling themselves prophets. And so Martin's like, hey, it's all their fault, and he was adamant against them. So then he writes another to the other side called Against the Murderous Thieving Hordes of Peasants. You never had to wonder where he stood, did you? Kind of like Larry. One of Larry's favorite sayings is like, you want to know what I think? Let me tell you. It says, therefore let everyone who can smite, slay, and stab secretly or openly, remembering that nothing can be more poisonous, hurtful, or devilish than a rebel. For baptism does not make men free in body and property, but in soul. And the gospel does not make goods common, except in the case of those who, of their own free will, do what the apostles and disciples did in Acts 4. They did not demand, as do our insane peasants in their raging, and the goods of others, of Pilate and Herod, should be common, but only their own goods. Our peasants, however, want to make the goods of other men common and keep their own for themselves. That's kind of something that could even be said today to certain crowds, right? Fine Christians they are. I think there is not a devil left in hell. They have all gone into the peasants. Their raving has gone beyond all measure. And so he had a little to say about everybody, equal opportunity offender, you might say. So he had 3 points to back up his grief against the peasants and what they were doing. And so his 3 points were, by choosing violence over lawful submission to the secular government, they were ignoring Christ's counsel to render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. And he points out what Paul taught about being subject to authority. And so this was one of his bases where they're erring in doing what they're doing. Second, he said, violent actions are outside God's law and deserve the penalty of highwaymen and murderers. And third, he charged them with blasphemy, calling themselves Christian brothers while committing their sinful acts. And so he had no love for these that were stirring up problems. So without Luther's backing, the rebellion basically died down because he didn't get behind them. The leaders were captured and executed, and so that was kind of the end of that. In 1523, he received a secret letter from a group of nuns. These nuns were actually in a convent that was in the territory of Duke George, and they were staunchly Catholic. And so any attempt to rescue them or pull them out, these nuns had converted to Luther's teaching, and so they were wanting out, but any attempt to get them out, you could be killed for doing that. And so they had to be very careful. Well, they were in danger. And so Martin devised a plan, and he found an ally with a local merchant who made regular deliveries of pickled herring to the, yeah, right. And so, they would take this pickled herring in and then come out. And so the arrangement was he brought the pickled herring in to the convent, and when he left, he didn't have an empty wagon. He had some nuns. And so these nuns were rescued, and then they had a new problem. What do we do with these 9 nuns that have no means of support and all this? So he thought about it, and he said, we need to find them husbands. And so he one by one, he got them all married off, and found husbands for these, except for this one holdout. This one called Katerina von Bora kept rejecting everyone. She like, he thought he had her, married off over here, and then she decided, she wasn't going to do it, and then had her married off over here, decided she wasn't going to do it. And so he sent what really his right-hand man, Nicholas von Amsdorf, he was a bishop that had converted to Luther's teaching and really became the first bishop in the Lutheran Church. And so he was, a good help to Martin. And so Martin said, Nicholas, I need you to go find out what's it going to take to make her happy? And so Nicholas goes and questions her, who will you marry? And she said, well, I would either marry you, Dr. Nicholas, or I would marry Dr. Luther. And so she was very specific about what she wanted to do. So everybody started kind of talking to Martin and saying, I think she would be a good wife for you. Of course, in the Catholic Church, clergy did not marry, right? I mean, you did not get married. And so since the Reformation, some of the clergy within the Lutheran Church had begun to marry. And so they knew that if we can talk Martin into getting married, being the head of the movement, then, I mean, that pretty much seals the deal. It's fine. And so they talked him into it, and he's like, really in it, okay, And so he married Katie, as he would come to call her. He actually had a lot of pet names and things to call her, but we'll just go by Katie right now. And so they got married, and really, it wasn't really out of love at first, right? It was kind of, hey, we're just going to do this, but really come to love each other. And she was a very strong woman, and she was good with money, whereas Martin was not. And so she was able to do a lot of things within the family. I saw you look over it. But she was able to help Martin in a lot of ways. And how many of you you feel that way about I better not say that, because if you don't raise your hand, you're in trouble. But, I feel that, me and Terry are totally opposite in a lot of ways, but we fit together like a puzzle. The things that she's strong in, I'm weak in, and that helps us. And so be a great couple. And so that's kind of what it was here. Martin and Katie had a great relationship. Soon after, they were expecting their first child, and Martin writes this later. He humorously said, "My Katie is fulfilling Genesis 1:28. There is to be born a child of a monk and a nun." So, after his first child, Hans, was born, he had this to say. I just thought it was a good little saying that we can all relate to. It says, "Child, what have you done that I should love you so? You are driving the whole house mad with your bawling. This is the sort of thing that caused the church fathers to vilify marriage." And so, I can relate to that too, right? And so anyway, he really embraced family life, and he was a guitar player, obviously. And so he embraced family life and had a great family life. He had Hans was his first child. Hans studied law and became a court official and died in 1575. Elizabeth, their second child, died really just a few months after birth. And then their third child, Magdalena, was born in 1529 and died as a young teenager in her father's arms, 13 years old, I believe it was. And then Martin Jr., 1531, and then died in his early 30s. Paul was born in 1533, and he became a doctor. And then Margareta was born in 1534. And so there's actually, through at least three of the children here, there are people today, living today, that can trace their lineage back to Martin Luther. And so he still has living descendants on earth today. Martin was a prolific writer, as I was talking about, and libraries are still today filled with his writings and things that he's written. He also wrote a lot of hymns, and so we'll talk about one in just a second, but he wrote a lot of songs, wrote them on his guitar apparently. And in 1527, Martin fell into deep depression, and he battled a lot of different sicknesses over time. He had things like kidney stones and a lot of different things that would plague him, but he really fell into a deep depression. And maybe it was just the pressures, maybe it was an attack of the devil that was just coming against him, but he wouldn't even hardly get out of bed, didn't want to do anything, and it was really just in a bad state. And he stayed that way for quite some time, until one thing happened. And just to kind of set this up, in the 1300s, we talked about just a little bit when we breezed through that time. Remember the bubonic plague? And so Black Death, as it was called, ravaged Europe and killed 20 million people, which was like a third of Europe's population. You know, we think we're facing a pandemic now, but can you imagine a third of the population of El Dorado dying, you know, just because of this plague? And so that was in the 1300s. Well, in 1527, an outbreak of the plague hit Wittenberg. And so you see they wore masks back then too. And I think if I were to wear a mask, I think I would get me one of those big chicken masks. That would be cool. But so
beard, white beard?
No, that's a mask.
Okay. So the black under the hat, is that like a?
That's like a mask over his eyes and stuff. So right. And so that's who's going around trying to care for people or whatever. But, you know, the bubonic plague was really attacking and really making a lot of people suffer. Well, guess what? This was just what Martin needed to break him out of the depression, because he so loved helping people that he decided, okay, I got to get up. And so he gets out. He starts helping people and ministering to their needs. And that's really what, you know, what drove him, just ministering to the needs of other people and just showing love. Katie was actually pregnant with Elizabeth while they were out helping people. I don't know, you know, but I mean, I might suppose that might be the reason why Elizabeth died, you know, after maybe the sickness got in there somehow. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I don't even play one on TV. But that's just the first thing that hit me is, hey, you know, this may have cost him his child's life in helping people. Luther believed that hard times were an occasion for God's beauty and God's love. And so during this time, he wrote his most powerful hymn. Does anybody know the most powerful hymn that he's known for? Mighty Fortress. That's right. So let's all stand and sing.
I know the first verse.
Do you? Let's hear it.
A mighty fortress is our God.
Okay, that's enough. Hey, I ran it by Tara. It's like, I think we're going to all sing this. She said, please don't.
Thank you, Derek.
So if you know the song, that's it, you know. That's right. Anyway, okay, so in 1528, it took, he started taking a tour of the churches, you know, a lot of these Lutheran churches had popped up. And remember, he still has a price on his head. None of that's gone away, but because some communities or some territories, if you will, had sided with Luther, then he could be in those areas and be safe, like Saxony and some of those places. He just couldn't go to the ones that were staunchly Catholic because he could be captured and killed there. And so he took a tour of some of the churches that was around, and he really was astounded that he would go up to some of these pastors of these churches, and they wouldn't even have a Bible. Can you imagine preaching without a Bible? We still have that going on today. That's why we have these campaigns for fire Bibles, so that we can take up collections and send Bibles overseas to new churches. Because, you know, how many of you have more than one Bible at home? And, you know, how many of you have more than 5 Bibles at home? And so you have pastors at churches in other countries that they don't even have a Bible. And so that's why these campaigns are, you know, trying to get Bibles to these pastors. How do you preach the Word of God without a Bible? And so this is what Martin was finding. And so he decided that, you know, I've got to do something about this. And so, of course, you know, his translation, I'm sure he was able to get some of those printed and get them into their hands. He started we'll call them Bible schools, if you will, but, you know, training for pastors. He also wrote something called the Catechism as an instruction book to pastors and to congregants alike. They were beautifully, he enlisted a illustrator to beautifully illustrate all these stories. So he would write the stories, and then he'd have them illustrated, and he made them like poster size. They were in books, but they were also poster sized, so people could get them and pin them on the wall. And so they were decoration, but they were also, you know, so you could learn about God. And if anybody knows any old German, that would be it. But so this is one of his campaigns. One of the things that he did to really promote learning in biblical literacy. What does that sound like to anybody? Doug Clay, our general superintendent, that's one of his big themes right now is biblical literacy, that we learn the Word of God and know the stories in the Bible. And so this is what Martin Luther was about. Luther also restructured worship services to include more songs. See, at the time, we talked about early first century church, didn't we? And it included songs, sometimes with or without music, just depending on if there was anybody that played music. But it had it had singing, it had preaching of the word. It had usually a meal to it. And so this is first century church. Well, over time, Mass had become, you had communion, you listened to a priest speak in Latin, and I mean, what was it? And so it was very formal, very impersonal. And so Martin said, hey, we need to restructure this. We're going to bring in some lively songs, And so I don't know if A Mighty Fortress was considered a lively song back then, but anyway, so they had songs, they had music, they had preaching of the word in the language they could understand. And so, what a novel concept. By 1529, Luther's church had spread to about 24 territories, and they started being labeled by new terms. Anybody know what that new term is? Protestant.
Because they protested.
Because they were protesting against the Catholic Church. We're going to pause right there, and we're going to look just briefly, because it sets up a meeting that happens in just a little bit, but at the Swiss Reformation. So the Swiss Reformation was going on about the same time, and it was really intertwined with the Martin Luther's Reformation and what happened there, and they just kind of took it and ran with it. Well, one of the big proponents of that or drivers of that is Ulrich Zwingli. Ulrich Zwingli, I'd never actually heard of him before, and so you'll hear of somebody that kind of came after him or succeeded him in his movement. But Zwingli was a priest and a chaplain to the Swiss army, and he grew to elevate the truth of Scripture over traditions of the church. In 1520, he secured permission from the city's governing council to preach the true divine Scriptures, and the resulting sermons helped really stir revolts against fasting and clerical celibacy that initiated the Swiss Reformation in 1522. Zwingli wrote extensively on many topics and wrote his own 67 articles, and so he had his own Reformation articles that he was promoting. He persuaded many priests in surrounding districts to get on board, and his preaching and his writings were very persuasive. And so in that territory where he was kind of a driving force of this Reformation. So Zwingli drafted a thesis that would be a foundation to spread the movement. And here's the articles that was in his thesis. That the church is born of the Word of God and has Christ alone as its head. Sounds like a good one. That its laws are binding only insofar as they agree with Scripture. That Christ alone is man's righteousness. That the Holy Scriptures does not teach Christ's corporeal presence in the bread and wine at the Lord's Supper. Pay close attention to the number 4. That the Mass is a gross affront to the sacrifice and death of Christ. That there is no biblical foundation for the mediation or intercession of the dead, for purgatory, or for images and pictures. So he was against the icons and all of that that surrounded it. And that marriage is lawful to all. So that seemed to be very important to him as well. And so this led to something called the Colloquy of Marburg. Luther had been aware of Zwingli, and so it came time that, as Zwingli's movement was kind of taken off and Luther's was taken off, hey, we got to get this together. If we're going to have a Reformation of the church, let's do this together in unity and not have this pocket and that pocket and that pocket. It sounds reasonable, right? So let's bring all the different leaders in this Reformation movement together and put them in the same room. And so Zwingli was there, Martin Luther was there. They met October 1529 at Wartburg Castle in Hesse, Germany. So there was 14 articles that they had put forth. These are the 14 things that we're going to, points that we're going to get together on, and they were able to get together on 13 of them. The final one was over communion. Because Martin, even though Martin Luther rejected transubstantiation, that the elements literally became the blood and the body of Christ, he rejected that, but he said, somehow, it's a mystery, I don't understand it, but somehow the presence of Christ has to be in the elements. And Zwingli was saying no, because he was clearly on the side of the elements are just symbolic. The bread and the wine is just symbolic, just in remembrance of Christ, to remember Christ. And so they went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And at some point, Martin had written in chalk on the table the words, "This is my body." And so he revealed it to him, and he said, "This is the words of Christ. This is my body. This is my body. This is my body." And he just started chanting that, "This is my body. This is my body." And so Zwingli was like, well, should really be taken as signifies. This signifies my body. And Martin was adamant about, we're not changing the scripture. The word is. This is my body. And so over that one point, there would be no coming together, and it was split apart. And this is really, so you have the Lutheran and the Reformed theology. So this is the split, right off of the Reformation splitting from the Catholic Church, now you have the Reformed and the Lutheran factions going different ways. Some people will point out that, especially those that are critical of Martin Luther, will point out his anti-Semitism. And he had a lot to write about the Jews, and he would say things about the Jews. In context, it would be fair to know that when he's talking about that, he's not bashing the ethnicity of the Jewish people. He's talking about Judaism as a religion and that belief system. And so by saying that, he says the Jews, but he's not against the people. As a matter of fact, he wrote a lot about wishing that the Jews would come, the Jewish people would come to know Christ the way that he knows Christ. And so he was very much in favor of the Jewish people, but he wrote a lot against the Jews. And I'm not going to read all of what I have here, because I have that much. But anyway, this is something that he wrote that just kind of pushes back against those that say that he was against the Jews. It says, "I will cite from Scripture the reasons that move me to believe that Christ was born of a virgin, that I might perhaps also win some Jews to the Christian faith." I'm going to skip down to these dots somewhere down here. It says, "When we are inclined to boast of our position, we should remember that we are but Gentiles, while the Jews are of the lineage of Christ. We are aliens and in-laws. They are blood relatives, cousins, and brothers of our Lord. Therefore, if one is to boast of flesh and blood, the Jews are actually nearer to Christ than we are." And so he goes on just to say that, hey, I'm not against the Jews. I'm for them accepting Christ, because that they're blood with Christ, whereas we're Gentiles. We're the ones that are grafted in, so to speak. Let's go on to what's called the Diet of Augsburg. In 1529, the Holy Roman Empire was really being ripped apart and divided by this. And so you had all these, Charles V remained staunchly Catholic, but you had these staunchly Catholic areas, but then some of the princes refused to submit to the authority of the Pope, and they had embraced the teachings of Luther. And so in the Holy Roman Empire, you had all these different territories that were being divided over, we're Catholic and we're Lutheran. And so the rulers of like Saxony and Wartburg and Hesse and Brandenburg and Prussia, they were all like Protestants, and really it's like 2/3 of the Germans, 2/3 of the others accepted the Reformation in one form or another. So really the Catholic territories were becoming less and less. So this alarmed Charles on a number of levels, because how can you have unity in your empire if you have this big divide? And so he calls everybody together, and in 1530, Charles called for the princes of the free territories in Germany to meet in Augsburg and explain their religious convictions in an attempt to restore the religious and political unity of the Holy Roman Empire. Martin couldn't attend because he still had a price on his head, and so the closest he could get was holed up in a castle about 120 miles away, and he had messengers that would go back and forth and try to keep him posted best they could of what was going on, and he might send messages back. The Protestant leaders brought a statement of faith called the Augsburg Confessions, and this is like the premier what's it called? One of the most important documents of the Protestant Reformation is these Augsburg Confessions. It even remains one of the biggest foundations of what the Lutheran Church believed. Charles, of course, he rejected this, and he gave the Protestants an ultimatum. Either you turn to Catholicism and rejoin the church, or prepare for war. And so this kind of rattled them a little bit, and so they went home and they prepared for war, knowing that they're really no match for Charles. They're really no match for, if the army comes in and tries to attack them, there's nothing they can do, but so be it. They were that convinced that they're sticking with their beliefs that they were ready to go to war. And so, however, Charles got preoccupied with helping his aunt. Anybody remember who his aunt was? Queen Isabella was his grandmother. His aunt was Catherine of Aragon. And so she was the queen and the wife of Henry VIII, right? And so Henry wanted to do what? He wanted to divorce her and marry Anne Boleyn, and the Pope was against that. And so, Charles wanted to make sure he kept the British crown and his family, right? Because really, we talk about the Holy Roman Empire, and there was France, and there was England, there was all these, but Charles really was the most powerful person in all of Europe, even the countries that he didn't have direct control over. And so this was kind of I need to keep this in the family to keep my toe over there in England. And so he got preoccupied with that and wound up not attacking all the Lutheran territories, and so that just kind of distracted him. Churches aligned with Luther's teaching, they started calling themselves Lutherans, and Martin Luther hated that. I mean, he hated them being called by his name. I wrote this quote down. It said, "I would rather they call themselves Christian. Who is Luther? The teaching is not mine, nor was I crucified for anyone. How did I, a poor, stinking bag of maggots that I am, come to the point where the children of Christ call themselves by my evil name? I am no one's master, nor do I wish to be." And that's the way he felt about it. But, what's he going to do? They're calling themselves Lutherans. But that's how he felt about it. By the 1550s, the movement and the name had become bigger than the man himself. Luther, he didn't really age well. As he got older, the wear and tear of the things that he had journeyed through, the sicknesses that he had, the bouts with depression, all those things took a real heavy toll on him. And in 1531, for example, even though when he was at his sickest, like physical illness, in 1531, even though he was sick for 6 months and suffered from exhaustion, he preached 180 sermons, wrote 15 tracts, worked on his Old Testament translation, and took a number of trips. And so, he was just relentless like that, and it eventually took a toll on his body. And so in 1546, he finally wore out. Passed away, and this is his grave right there. With Luther dead, Charles finally carried out his threat and sent armies in the territories loyal to the Reformation. They attacked Luther's farm, they destroyed it, and just a lot of things like that. But with all the efforts, Charles would not unify the empire under one religion and resigned as emperor and lived out the rest of his life as a monk in seclusion. And so it's like, if I can't bring it all together, I quit. And so that's the effect that Luther had even after his death. Luther's legacy is really immense, and it can't be summarized in even the 2 weeks that we've covered it. Doesn't even begin to even scratch the surface of it. But if you think about, though, every Protestant reformer like Calvin and Zwingli and everybody that come after them and others we may not even cover in the weeks to come, every Protestant stream like Lutheran and Reformed and Anglican and Anabaptist, all of these were inspired by Luther. They all have his imprint on it in some way. And on a larger canvas, his reform unleashed forces that really ended the Middle Ages and unleashed the modern era. So it's almost like a divide that ushered in a completely different era in time. Few Protestant churches subscribe to everything that Martin Luther taught. And we could, if we wanted to take his theology, we could pick it apart if we wanted to. But he's left his mark on over 1 billion Protestant Christians in the world today. And so that's why we took him for 2.5 weeks instead of, like most of them, just get a half a week. But he really was a character in the church that brought forth change, and it continued change. He kind of was the catalyst that got the ball rolling, right? Some of the balls rolled wildly in a wrong direction, and some of them rolled in a very good direction. But he was that kind of person. One thing that he was big on that I thought we'd just discuss for just a little bit is that word. Does anybody know anything about that? Grace. The medieval view of grace was that it could be purchased, right? It had to be earned by penance, or it could be purchased. You could purchase grace for your loved ones after they pass away to get them onto heaven or whatever. That grace was something that could be bargained with. Grace was something that could be withheld by popes and granted by popes and priests. And so this is kind of medieval grace. To the Catholic, grace is the free gift of God that is given through 7 sacraments of the Catholic Church. Does anybody know what the 7 sacraments of the Catholic Church is? Does anybody know what our sacraments are? How many do we have?
Communion,
Communion and water baptism. Okay, so the 7 in the Catholic Church is baptism and the Eucharist, or what we would call communion, confession, confirmation, marriage, anointing of the sick, and ordination. And so through these 7 sacraments, that's how grace is basically dispensed to the people. Martin came to understand Ephesians 2:8 and 9 that said, "For it is by grace that you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast." And so this is really the spark that set Martin off in this, and of course the Roman scriptures that we've talked about in Romans chapter 1. Last week we talked about justification. It's God's grace that justifies us when we don't deserve it. It's not something that I don't deserve grace, but yet God gives that as a free gift to us. So here's the discussion question. What is grace to you?
Unmerited.
Okay, unmerited favor is the common one that you hear a lot. So unmerited favor. And you said gift. Romans 3:23 and 24. We know 23 well, right? We like that one. "For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, and are justified by his grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, whom God put forward as a propitiation by his blood to be received by faith." In Ephesians 2:8, we read part of it a second ago. "For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing, it is a gift from God." This gift is not given by a priest. It's not given by a person or a man. It's given by God. It's a gift from God himself. Martin forwarded the teaching that we're all priests, right? Where's that come from?
1 Peter 2:9.
What's that?
1 Peter 2:9.
Oh, I didn't know I clicked. You cheated. Oh, But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, right? And of course, we could go into the scripture, but that royal priesthood is what Martin Luther would hone in and say, we're all priests. We've been declared priests by God. And so, if you want to say that grace has to come through a priest, fine. We're all priests. So therefore it does. Romans 10:13 says what?
Whoever calls in the name of the Lord will be saved.
Whoever. And then calls on the name of the Lord. So we're not having to call on the name of a priest, or we're not having to call on the name of some other figure, but we call directly whoever, not a specific person, whoever calls upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. So final note, and let's get back to your point, that we value grace, we value God's grace to us. No doubt, no question. We all value God's grace to us. But so often, we have trouble imparting grace to other people. And, how would you like it if God still held your past against you? Does anybody have anything in your past that you just wish God would just ignore? We all do. And by past, we may mean last week, right? But yet, how easy is it, now I'm not going to ask for a show of hands if this is you, but how easy is it sometimes to hold somebody's past against them? Something they've said. Man, somebody says something about you 10 years ago. I know people that they never let it go. They said that. Where's grace? 1 Peter 4:10 says, as each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. God gives that grace to us. And then he says, okay, I've given this to you. Now I want you to steward that grace to my people. And it is hard. It's hard to sweep those things under the rug. What if they don't apologize for it?
It's not up to you to make them apologize.
That's right. God's grace toward us, is sufficient. His grace is sufficient. And so we need to be stewards of that grace to other people. Because nobody's perfect. I'm not perfect. If I've hurt your feelings, I hope you extend some grace to me. Because sometimes I'm like a bull in a china closet. But we need to be stewards of grace. So if somebody has wronged you or hurt you in the past, show them a little grace. Don't keep bringing those things up. Don't keep remembering those things. Let's remember that grace is what Todd said, unmerited favor.
We don't deserve it.
And so what if that person doesn't deserve my grace? They don't have to deserve it. Extend that grace to them just as God extends his grace to you. Grace was freely given to us, and we in turn, as good stewards of grace, are to give freely that grace to others.